All right, let's go. Welcome everyone to this NAIDOC week, presentation of Monthly Histories, where we celebrate the history, culture and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. This year's theme is for our elders, and I wish to acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional lands of the Awabaka peoples, and pay my respects to ancestors of this land and to the elders past, present and yet to be. I also pay our respects to the elders of the lands who are joining us today via Zoom, and also acknowledge First Nations Indigenous people joining us today. A welcome also to City of Newcastle Councillors, Councillor Carol Duncan and Dr Elizabeth Adamczyk, as well as Councillor Margaret Wood and Councillor Jenny Barry, who will be either joining us in person or zooming in. So for our first presentation today, it will be on the Dorothy Hewett Centenary celebration. So family, friends and colleagues recently came together to recognise the 100th anniversary of the birth of activist and feminist Dorothy Hewett, who was one of Australia's groundbreaking poets, playwrights and novelists. Her eldest son, Joe Flood, recounts the celebration events held in the Blue Mountains and her ties with Newcastle for his presentation today. Joe is a policy data analyst and mathematician who for many years worked for the CSIRO, conducting over 25 research projects for every level of government, with particular focus on housing policy and analysis, which we can really do with now. Among his other main research interests is historical research using DNA, which we should have a future presentation on. But for the time being now, over to you, Joe and Marilla.
Hello, can you in fact hear me?
Yes.
Good, that's a good start.
Joe.
Okay, we had an event which took us quite some time to organise in Springwood in the Blue Mountains at my mother's grave on the 21st of May this year, not very long ago, at which point we had to clean up the grave, which was in rather poor shape, which took us about a month. And we had Susan Templeman, who's the federal member for the area and is also the envoy to the arts. And she spoke first up. She said, repeated more or less what you said, that she was one of Australia's groundbreaking poets. She was an activist and strong feminist. She spent the last 10 years of her life living and writing in the Blue Mountains and was buried there. It was very powerful to hear her poetry and extracts from her plays performed today, as well as stories from people who work with her. I learned so much and it brought back memories of challenges that many artists and writers faced when pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable on stage and in print. Thanks to Dorothy Hewett's family, which included Joe Flood, Tom Flood and Marilla North, two of whom are here today. We did put together a fairly long presentation, which was played at the intermission before we went up to the golf club up the hill, where we had a kind of performance, yeah, after the ceremony at the grave. And we've kept a record of that. We still have to put it together into a movie, which we shall do. It's all in 1.5 minute pieces. So we'll get that together shortly. But we do have quite a bit there already listed in terms of photographs and the actual presentation, which is a self-running thing, which is up on YouTube. Just for today, I thought I'd better mention how did Newcastle come into this? And it came in surprisingly often, given that Mum was a Western Australian and given that she moved to Sydney twice. Why Newcastle? It's still somewhat open as to why, but I think Newcastle was just seen as a radical Newcastle was seen as a foundation for the working class in Australia, and things happened there. And she was seeking myths of the working class and she found them in Newcastle. I've got a list of about 10 things where she was connected with Newcastle. fairly directly. In 1952, my father, they came straight back from a study trip to the Soviet Union and China. My father demanded they go to Newcastle. He was a boilermaker. He beat her up. They separated. She took a train with me to Curry, where she reconciled with Les and spoke at Pit Top and Union meetings, and they danced in union halls. They had a second honeymoon. I suspect my brother Michael was conceived in that area, in the Upper Hunter. A few years later, she started to write again. She didn't write during the whole Communist Party period, virtually. But in 1957, she wrote Norman Brown, which refers to the Rothbury Riot in the 1920s, and has become one of Australia's best-known folk songs. And
Beatles chorus.
wait, yeah, they do sing it. A lot of people, there's 3 different tunes to Norman Brown floating around. We sang it on the day, 2 of the tunes. In 1957, the Newcastle May Day Committee had a Mary Gilmore Short Story Prize. She won first and second prize in the open section, and Vera Deacon, I'm sure you know of, won the New Writers first and second prize. So they sort of scooped the pearl between them. The following year, there was a larger Mary Gilmore Prize, which was said to be the first union-sponsored Writers' Prize in Australia. It was sponsored by Newcastle and also by the Sydney and Melbourne May Day committees. Frank Hardy challenged her and for them both to write something, and she finished bobbing up in 6 weeks, which is a story about a strike in spinning mills in Alexandria and Sydney. In 1958, things got nasty again with my father. He was in very poor condition with a mental illness. He was secretly planning to take us to his brother in Lake Macquarie and said he had a job at Newcastle Steelworks. He was just about to go, and she grabbed us first, and we all escaped to Perth, which I suppose was one of the main events of my life. Then a couple of years following, 2 years later, she married Merv Lilly, my stepfather. Presumably while heavily pregnant, she wrote Weevils in the Flower on the Kitchen Table to become an anthem of the Depression. So that's the second big ballad she wrote, or the third, I suppose.
Based on your story.
It's based on the stories of Vera Deacon. They are both included in this book called What About the People, which was put out in 1961. We decided to reissue it for the Centenary as our first effort. We'll be putting out a second volume called Remembering Dorothy later in the year or early next year, which will have a whole lot of remembrances of people from my mother and various assorted critical things, and which is a sort of a first. I can't remember anyone doing a combined thing like that. But the book itself is now issued. We are trying to, it's on sale now, and yeah, we're looking for, we'll have a book opening for it in Newcastle.
25th.
Yeah, Marilla will briefly mention this after. A couple of final things. In 1972, before moving to Sydney, so we've moved on 12 years, Mum was in some sort of writers in residence in Newcastle. I've never been able to work out quite what it was, but she was definitely there. She was definitely there with Norman Talbot. In 1976, a guy called Terence Clark, who did the music for a couple of her musicals, was working in Newcastle, and as sort of artistic director of the new Newcastle Theatre Company. So she had a connection through that. In 1979, her play Man from Muckanuppin was put on in Newcastle. And in 1981, she had a rather disreputable writer in residence again in Newcastle University, in which I still haven't worked out what happened then, but you've already got material about it in your archives. There was some sort of brawl in a pub between my stepfather Merv and somebody else. There was also an infamous poetry reading in which Robert Adamson got up and played up something fierce, and with Mum doing something anyway. And this was reported at Adamson's funeral this year. So it was of sufficient note that it made the news. So as you can see, she was someone who was always involved in controversy one way or another. She's, by the way, I should have said she's relevant to NAIDOC Week because she wrote the ballad Clancy and Dooley and Don McLeod way back in 1946 when she went up to cover the Aboriginal stockman strike in Port Hedland and the Pilbara, yeah. And that has been put to music since then, and that also is in What About the People book. Do you want to have a go now, Marilla?
Well, I just thought I'd show you the book that we put out for Vera, which I'm sure you all remember, Singing Back the River. But it was illustrated by Noel Conahan. And the original cover for What About the People, which Ross Edmonds, thank heavens, found for us online, and we paid an extraordinary amount of money for one of the, I think it was 100 first editions that Dorothy and Merv put together in Perth in 1969, before 61, before they headed off for Queensland for various purposes. But the cover that the edition that Ross found for us, which will end up in the Newcastle University archives, I promised that to the vendor, which got us a cut in the price, which was good. And this cover, here it is here, a highly restored image, because the original had faded and had a few marks on it, but that not much at all. But I just wanted to show you where there's no attribution of the author, but in Vera's chapbook, we use a lot of Noel Conahan's illustrations. And I reckon that Noel Conahan probably had a hand in this, even though he didn't sign it, he certainly was in contact. So I'm just showing you that from Vera's book to compare, see what you guys think of the image that's on the front cover. So when we got this manuscript, well, not manuscript, it was actually produced by Ronioing on a Gestetner machine in the kitchen of the family home that they'd established by then in Perth. And little Joe, how old were you then, Joe?
11.
About 11, yep. He was given the job of turning the machine, the handle on the Ronio machine of the Gestetner, and printing 100 copies of each page. And as you may or may not know, the Gestetner process was quite antiquated. Well, we used to use them when I was teaching. You used to type onto a stencil, and the ink came through from the carbon underneath and cut the letter, which was then put on a drum on the machine, and 2 drums rolled over and printed. They couldn't get more than 100 copies per stencil.
50 more like it.
And 50 more like it. So it was a very difficult and very arduous printing operation, which an 11-year-old took on, and then collated them, stapled them, and bound them. That's the illustration of the binding. Bound them with yellow tape, and having stapled them previously. And they took them all to Brisbane with them, and ended up at Wynnum with the sort of community of folk singers and communist believers on the shores of the bay south of Brisbane. And it took part in lots of events that year. In fact, it was the year when Dorothy joined with another comrade that had also been on the expedition to Russia, which is Nancy Wills. And they wrote
she never was.
the first, oh, she wasn't on that one. I thought she was. Okay,
No.
Sorry. He was, her husband was.
No,
Jeff.
he wasn't.
Yes, he was.
No,
with
he
Norman.
wasn't.
Okay, we won't argue about that one. And the outcome was I've lost my thread now. The outcome was a play that Nancy and Dorothy joined together on, called The Ballad of Women. And we located that last year too in the archives of the Friar in Nancy Wills' papers, and put it together. And we almost did that as part of the launch, but there was a bit of controversy between the family on the issues of the day of the performance. Never try and get something together when all the Flood family are together. And so we didn't do that little play, but it's an interesting little manuscript. And the boys remembered the tunes. And that started us on the long search, I think, that since evolved, of the search for the tunes of all Dorothy's plays. And the more we got together the performance for the 21st of May, which of course was the anniversary, the 100th anniversary, the day of her birthday at Springwood Cemetery and at the local country club, the more we got those things together, the more we realised how vital music was. And when they started memoiring aloud, the boys came up with the notion that every time she was ever writing a play, she was humming and singing the tunes, and that's helped them recover a lot of the lost music. You tell your story about when you're trying to.
No, just to finish on this.
Okay.
Carol Ferrier is from University of Queensland, is a big fan of Mum's. He put out this edition of Hecate, the Feminist Journal. We've got Mum as a Girl on the back, and
17, sweet 17.
Yeah, and she called it the 100th anniversary. There's absolutely nothing in it that refers to Dorothy Hewett except the short story I wrote called Big Dog and Man, which was about a famous dog and my stepfather. But anyway, it's nice of her to have done it. And
we'll be re-bringing those.
We've got a number of copies of this with us as well. So that's the story. We got any questions on that?
Any questions? And the PowerPoint and the photos that you sent through on the site as well. So if you want to have a look at the... So any questions for Joe or Marilla?
I haven't got a question. I've just got a comment. I've got some files I'll send to you, Marilla and Joe, about Dorothy's writers in residence in the 1970s in Newcastle. That was when Whitlam's government got in. They gave funding for the writers in residence. I don't know that she was a writer in residence again in 1981, because I thought the funding for that project had stopped, but she might have been in Newcastle for another reason. But I'll send you my files.
Thank you, Jude. That'll be gratefully received.
Yeah, we'd like that. We're trying to work out exactly what would go on in those periods.
We have been sending you messages this morning, but you were obviously out.
But
I have answered one message. I couldn't find the woman from Curry.
Oh, no, neither could we. But yeah, we'll go through Barbara's papers. I think that's the best. I even rang Greg Giles. He was in Brisbane this morning, but he couldn't place it from his mother's sort of stories either. But she must be there, and she's probably, he said, suggested Trove. So we'll have a good look and see what's there in the Curry locals.
I did look. I spent the last 24 hours looking for stuff. There's stuff around about the 81, but I can't find anything about the 72. So we'll look forward mostly, particularly to that.
And that resulted from Norman Talbot's friendship with her. He actually flew over to Perth when she was they'd been corresponding the operations on her eye, and spent a day sitting by her sickbed, and went back and wrote a very beautiful poem to her about their shared experiences that day, which I'll also send through, Johnny, for the website.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Joe and Marilla. Okay.
Pleasure.
Right. I should say that we're planning to continue. This is only the beginning. The launch was in May, and now we'll be going for 12 months, trying to do various activities during the course of the year, which then
next one's Newcastle.
No, well, the next one's in a bookshop over here, and then we'll go up to Newcastle.
Oh, that's right. There's one in the middle.
And we'll gradually get back to Sydney, I should hope.
Yeah, that's going to be the hard one to crack. But can I just give you a little tip that we're going to be working with the People's Choir and Ross and everybody from the book club to get together an event on the day of her death. So it's 21 years since she died, and that's the 25th of August. And this morning I temporarily booked, and I hope we can keep it, the Stag and Hunter, because I think it's well known to the locals, and the People's Choir have got room to gather in their total membership there. Okay.
Great. Well, People's Choir sang a beautiful rendition of Wiggles and the Flower.
They did last.
That was great. All right, to our second presentation on Yirannali, the Quiet Project. So Yirannali, for those who don't know, is the Aboriginal name for the sea beach in the overarching cliff area of South Newcastle Beach. It was described as a sort of a sacred place by the Reverend Threlkeld in the 1800s, following an interaction with Biriban of the Newcastle Macquarie tribe, who instructed him on how to conduct himself in this land, especially around that cliff. It's a pretty timely topic for discussion following last month's public seminar, which really brought home the negative impact that community public monuments have on First Nations peoples. It makes them feel unwelcome in their own country. So Yirannali, the Quiet Project, has been 11 years in the making, because that was the last time Paul came and spoke to us about it when we were still the Coal River Working Party on the other side of the campus. So it's an opportunity for Newcastle to sort of be a world leader in redressing and promoting First Nations narratives embodied in public art and sculpture against the plentiful narrative celebrating colonists and colonisation's historical objectives. So with him is Julie Squires, and over to you, Paul and Julie.
I plant this tree in the spirit of the Currawong. Black feather, white feather, lifting me. I plant this tree to call upon all Australians to replant a shared future together. Yirannali, the Quiet Project. We call upon all Australians, the Gurukkai Committee and Newcastle City Council to champion this independent national reconciliation project that seeks to inspire unity in community while replanting a shared future together. We honour a moment in time in the continuum of reconciliation when the black man, Birivan, is advising the white man, Threlkeld, of matters pertaining to the black man's country rather than the other way around. The quiet, wild community garden adjacent to Newcastle South Beach will be a national reconciliation reflection space that inspires all Australians, other cities, and overseas visitors alike. Heart of our nation, reconciliation. At the heart of Yirannali the Quiet Project is the healing magic of co-creation between Aboriginal artists and non-Aboriginal artists. And we have with us today a living legend in the art of such co-creation, my unique creative friend, Julie Squires. Julie Squires is a renowned international Novocastrian artist and sculptor who was the creative director for Indigenous art at the Australian Pavilion for the World Expo in Shanghai and scenic team manager for production installation of the Australian Pavilion at the World Expo in Japan. Julie's work is held in collections in Australia, Europe, China, and the UK. She has extensive experience in collaborating with Indigenous artists, including the Gathering Garden in Alice Springs and the Tasmanian Devil at the entry to Sydney's Taronga Zoo. Although Julie is not Indigenous, she has Warlpiri and Gupanier family. This family connection has inspired her co-creative work. In 2020, Julie collaborated with Wagle artist Therese Adler to create Australia's 250th anniversary commemoration of first contact between Cook and the crew of the Endeavour with the Wagle clan of the Dharawal people of Kalmay Bay. Julie has undertaken many public art commissions throughout Australia, including the Muster Point, Destiny, the Brickworker, Carrington Gateway and Nobby's Bicentenary Breakwall in and around the Newcastle Harbour precinct. Julie has vast experience in working with local, state and federal governments in the public arts sphere, and she has an enviable reputation for successfully managing project budgets and production timelines. In 2011, Julie was the recipient of the University of Newcastle's Newton-John Award for Innovation and Creativity. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Julie Squires to talk to us and share with us the healing magic of co-creation between Aboriginal artists and non-Aboriginal artists.
Yeah. Can I unmute on that and just talk? Okay, that's
The
great.
room will pick you up.
Wonderful. Gosh, okay, that was big, Paul.
I feel like giving you an Academy Award.
Oh,
Sorry,
no,
sorry.
I promised I would make her blush.
Yes, and you have, and it takes a bit for that to happen. I'm going to share my screen, if I can get this happening.
I can see it.
You can see it, and I put this to the side. So I'll talk a bit faster. Let me see. So I guess one of my first major public artworks was, well, I know it was in Newcastle, this one, at Dyke Point back in 1999. I'm just going to go through these for those people who don't know me. And let me just get to the right spot. And I also worked at the BHP as artist in residence from 1998 to 99. I was actually making the Muster Point sculpture and the Destiny sculpture at exactly the same time, one doing the day shift at the BHP and the other night shift in my studio then at Islington. I think in that year I had 12 days off and I was rather exhausted. But my first public art project was along Nobbies for Newcastle's Bicentenary. And it was also, this was 1996, it was also the first time I ever collaborated with an Aboriginal artist. And in this case, it was with Minnie Heath. As part of the Bicentennial, when I was asked to do this work, someone actually said, oh, you have to acknowledge the local Aboriginal people in your artwork. It was the first time, and this is, as said, 96, where my actual family connection and my experience with my family came to the forefront. And I said, well, that's not my cultural story and I can't do that. The only way it can be done is if I actually collaborate directly with an Aboriginal artist. And Minnie Heath graciously came on board and was then came to my studio. We worked side by side on this work. And that's basically the beginning and the continuation of how my approach to working with Aboriginal cultural story and Aboriginal artists co-creatively. I put this little photo in with permission from the family. This is me as a 12-year-old at Bachelor Community in Darwin. A lot of people have said to me over the years, what's your connection to Aboriginal people? And, you know, sometimes I've been questioned, you know, as to what my intentions were. And basically it's like I was very privileged to grow up with Aboriginal family, Walkley family from Yirannali. And as a 12-year-old was taken out of Newcastle, where I was going to school at St Joseph's in Merewether and taken to the Tiwi Islands initially, and then travelled around the country with my Aboriginal auntie and my Irish uncle. Because of that family connection, I've always wanted to work with Aboriginal artists in a very respectful way where we work together. So this isn't appropriation, it's co-creation. And all the time, I've been working now for 30 years in the field of public art. Most of the time I get my work through expressions of interest in tenders. And going back another decade or a decade and a half when placemaking was all the catchphrase, I would often be given a tender or an expression of interest where the local government, or in this case it was Healesville Wildlife Sanctuary, would say, you need to acknowledge the local Aboriginal people. And my response was always, well, I can only do that if someone wants to work with me. And so I would always connect with Aboriginal elders from that community and want to talk to them about the importance of the site for them. On this occasion, the gentleman down the side, Myron Dindy, and I spoke, and he said, my approach was always, well, what would you want? Well, if you could have anything in the world that you would like in this space, what would it be? And his response was, well, it has to be our creation totem, the eagle. And he had been trying to get the creation story of the Yarra River, which is that the eagle, swoops down and drags along a stick along the ground, a bit more, a longer story than that. He'd been trying to get it published for years and couldn't get funding. So I said, well, why don't we work together? And so I made this eagle. It's actually 7 metres long in steel. But we cast the story of the Yarra River and the creation story from Murrindindi into that. It's more of a log than a stick, I guess, in cast iron. So his story, and it's acknowledged to him, is all part of that. So just to give you an idea of that sort of creative process. Paul mentioned this project I did in Alice Springs. This was 2008. Because my family is from up there, they told me about this project where Alice Springs Town Council wanted an artwork in the centre of Alice Springs. And it's a very conflicted space. I mean, it's Arundel land, but there are obviously Alice Springs is a community of Aboriginal people from all around the Northern Territory. So my approach was to work with two Arundel sisters, Teresa and Roseanne Ellis, as the central motif, which is, can I go back? Let's see. One. I'll go forward to that one, was to put the central motif as the Arundel artwork. And then I worked with artists from 8 different communities, in remote communities, and 8 different language groups. And then all the work came together so that everyone was represented in a way that was very cohesive. So this is one of the paintings, and each artist I worked with was selected by the elders of that community. So I spoke to them in a community consultation way and said, can you, talk to the artist and say, who has the cultural rights to represent you? And that is the person, if they're keen, I'll work with. So in this case, I was then given the artist paintings. This is me back in my studio in Alice Springs, and we scaled up these paintings using architectural plan printers. And I created these forms, traced them on, I was actually pregnant with my son then, and then cast them into bronze. So they became these seats within a landscape garden, which had 450 plants, which included bush medicine. And again, the plant selection was by the Aboriginal community as well. So the central feature, which was this, was a water coolamon with the Arundel language saying for our children. And we had that in English and in Arundel. And again, that was an amazing experience of what you can do, when given a great budget. I'm going too fast, my little finger's moving. Another project, this is just giving an outline of the varsity, I guess, of the different approaches you can do. I worked with a Kurnai male artist who was the son of the last initiated Kurnai man in Gippsland, and he wanted to do the dreaming story of the Kurnai people. So we turned his father's shield design that he was, again, culturally able to pass on into this 9 metre high steel cobalt blue and black representing the blue wren as the gateway sculpture to Gippsland, which was amazing. The main project I wanted to talk about, and I'm aware I don't have very much time, so I'll go a little fast with this, is the 250th anniversary of Cook landing in Sydney. So Lieutenant Cook, not Captain Cook, I had to make sure I had that right, and the crew of the Endeavour. Now, this was like Australia's biggest hot potato as far as memorials and anniversaries go. And it was actually one of my friends from Newcastle, Megan Hill, who runs the Creative Ingredient, came to me with this expression of interest and said, this is like a really, an amazing opportunity, and it could be done really badly or it could be done well. So I think you should go for it. My approach was to do the same thing I've been doing for years, was to do some community consultation and try to find an artist who had a direct cultural link to that site, to that very site-specific area. Hence, I was able to meet with Teresa Adler, and she's given me permission to use images of her in this presentation. We met, and through discussions I discovered she is a direct descendant of the person alleged that Cook shot on first contact through his second family on the south coast. So I thought, this is the person I want to work with, absolutely. And again, because of my Aboriginal family and my experience, my connection to family, she was very comfortable being able to work with me in this capacity, because I understood. This is Teresa, and I love this image. I think it was the front cover of The Australian not long ago. She is a fierce woman who I can proudly call sister now. And this possum skin cloak she's wearing, she has a painting on the inside, which is based on her drawing, this drawing of the two whales. So when I met with Teresa, we met on site at Kurnell, and I said to her, if you could have anything in the world that you wanted to be here to represent your clan of people, the Girawal clan that Cook, had that first contact, what would it be? And she said, well, it can only be one thing. It has to be our totem, the humpback whale. And I stood there and went, okay. Yep, we can do that. So the image of the mother and the baby whale is actually in cave engravings around the La Perouse area. And this was Teresa's drawing. I'm really old school. I'm very good with a grinder and a welder, but I don't know how to do Photoshop and I don't know how to do CAD. So this is literally my first impression, was to cut and paste with glue her images onto this foreshore in where we stood. So that was the other element to this. She wanted it to be on the sandstone foreshore, looking across to La Perouse. So it was quite an interesting site. Even though it was Australia's 250th anniversary, the process of artist selection and everything that entailed meant that we were given the commission on the 5th of December and told we needed to have it installed by the 20th of April under threat of financial punishment, shall we say. The contract was brutal that we had to sign with the National Parks. This was COVID coming in. So that's December before January 2020. COVID, bushfires. Poor Teresa was being evacuated at Wreck Bay by the Navy. She was in a boat in Wreck Bay, as I was calling her, saying, can you please give approval of this line work for the computer artist, who was the lovely computer artist Matt Hatton, based in Katoomba. He was being evacuated from Katoomba because of the bushfires, but we had to get a robot to carve the sculpture because it was impossible for humans to get it carved and cast in time. So this is actually, if I can do this here we go. This is film footage of the robot carving the baby whale for Sydney. So it's a 7-axis robot. These things are used a lot in film production. And a computer file was created by Matt Hatton to tell that robot how to cut Teresa's design. So we're talking really, embracing modern technology. It's quite amazing. This is an image from a place in Sydney, a company called Gorilla, who again does a lot of big movie set pieces. 4 months to make a sculpture, half-life size whale in cast bronze during a pandemic and bushfires was insane. But we did it by having the robot carve the whale. This is Teresa and I. And again, hands-on approach. Teresa was an integral part of every decision-making. Because of my history in bronze casting, I was able to look at the whale and I literally got out the marker pen and drew all the sections that need to be cast into bronze. It was cast in 32 sections and welded together. So, as I said, I'm better with a grinder. Welded together in Melbourne. This whale went all over the country. It was cast in Castlemaine. I had an exemption as an essential worker from the Australian government that I was one of the few people who could travel around Australia during the pandemic. And I actually drove down in a van wearing latex gloves with my son wearing latex gloves because we didn't know, this was before the vaccines, we didn't know what was going on. And the final works, it's 3 ton of bronze. And amazing, like getting it in on that sandstone. The heritage listing for that site is the whole talk in its own. One of the things that came out was the site was public safety, because a lot of people like to take selfies. And we knew that where the location was going, there was this big rock crevice. So the National Park said to me, can we put a fence around that so people don't fall in? And my suggestion was that they leave it with me for a week and let me come up with another concept. On the fly, I wanted to find another way of incorporating another Aboriginal artist's work. So this is a weaving by an amazing master weaver called Phyllis Stewart, who is also Darwall, so again, connected through the same country. She wove this and she had Band-Aids on her fingers, as you can see, in her hands. She had 2 weeks to weave it. We sand cast this weaving, cast in 4 sections. That's the process, getting sand cast. And then I welded it all together. And every one of those holes, when it was cast, had some sort of, metal flashing from the casting process. And I used a TIG welder to melt it all back so that it was safe for children. So that's actually bronze. You could park a truck on that. But the other good thing is that water can flow up and through it as well. So you can see its location in it. And this is Teresa with the whales. Now, another element to this project was we cast bark canoes, who were done again by 2 male elders, Dean Kelly and John Kelly, who are connected to Darwall country. And I think John Kelly did a bark canoe making process here at Wallatuka only a few months ago. So actually able to take that bark canoe, and I could cut it into 3 sections and then cast it again in sand, adding fish and fish hooks to add that educational element. The final pieces were then put into the sandstone, and this is like a tidal work. So the water comes in, and when the water comes in, it looks like the canoes are floating, and when it goes out, they're pulled up to shore. Just quickly, this is a project, and again, I just want to talk about this co-creative process and how it works for me. I had a longer time on this project. This is for Shell Harbour down south of Wollongong. Again, working with Teresa, but another 2 Darwall women, Jodie Edwards and Nicole Talbot. So we've reused that Coolamon seat idea because this was a way of having a budget that could talk about the creation story of Windang Island. Again, site-specific, working with artists who are connected to that country. But here's Teresa in my studio in Mayfield East. So what I do, the ultimate for me is having these Aboriginal artists come and we work side by side. We're telling stories as we're making. And I spoke to Teresa and I said, one of the terms, people say this is like reconciliation in action. She says, I just call you my sister. Let's just get down to the crux of this. It's like we work together. But in this process, Teresa is able to do something with me. So I'm looking pretty tired in my overalls. This is my alter ego in steel cap boots. 2 of us looking like mini me because Teresa's wearing my overalls as well. We're working together to create something that she can't make without me because she's not a sculptor and she's not a bronze caster and she's not used to working in a medium that can last for 25 years as things need to be legally out in the public. But it's not my cultural story and I can't make this without her. So it's in doing it together that is incredible. So this is Jodie and I making the Coolamon seats. And Jodie is a knowledge holder, but again, not an artist, not someone who's used to making artworks, but the absolute joy in being hands-on as part of this making process. These are the works in my studio, again in Mayfield East, before they went on the truck down here. So this idea of creating a space where people can sit quietly, and this is, coming back down to this Yirannali concept where, the idea is to work with local Aboriginal artists so that their cultural story is permanently in Newcastle. And as a Novocastrian, I find it frustrating that I'm travelling around the country making these beautiful spaces, like this one in Kurnell, but there's nothing in my own hometown of a sizable, historic stature that can acknowledge the local Aboriginal community. And so the whole Yirannali concept about Thrakeld and Birrabin is something of national, significance that is an amazing thing. And for me, it's that idea of leaving a legacy. We leave something behind. And in the the theme of NAIDOC week for our elders, I have a lot of communication with elders from all around the country, and in most of the time they're saying, we need to know our cultural story is still going to be here when we're gone, and a lot of the stories are being lost. And so for them, what I'm doing, you know, with artists from their communities, like the Darwin one, the dreaming story of Windang Island, it's permanently there. It can last for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years now. And so the elders are really on board because it's their story. So I get to feel privileged, absolutely, to be part of this. It's quite amazing. There you go.
Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to sit with that thought now before we have a discussion later. But thank you very much. And look, I can say from an archivist, if you're going to do anything, do it in bronze or stone, because that will survive thousands of years as things from that time. If you do it on paper or anything like that, it's not going to survive as long. So
compared to the monument to Cole in Newcastle that is in King Edward Park, and it's made out of Italian marble.
yes, marble, all marble. Okay, all right, so let's just sit with that.
Parnell Place, actually.
So I just want to acknowledge that Lord Mayor Dorothy has sent 2 representatives, Councillor Carol Duncan and Dr. Elizabeth Adanchek. I hope I pronounced your name. So anyway, think about what Julie and Paul have just said, and then if you get a chance, also have a look at the Yirannali backgrounder that we gave, but it's really important to sort of have a bit of a free-form discussion. Anyway, just as an interlude, Robert Watson has found a cache of West Wallsend Museum maps, Robert, that are looking for a new home. Are you there, Robert?
I sure am. Can you see that?
Yes. Good.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So just quickly, the background here is that the West Wallsend Historical Museum is winding back, and 1/4 of their contents are already in the Sugar Valley Library Museum, which is at Cameron Park. So here's just a couple of pictures of what you see if you go out there. If I can, whoops. They've got a sculpture there that was made out of old pieces of horseshoes and things like that. So it's very nice. This is inside the museum, so that's like the full length of it. They have a glass side that looks through to their storage area, so that's kind of good. So the storage area is not locked off; it's just not labelled at all. And it's got things from various collieries around the place, West Wallsend Cooperative Bakery, various toys and things like that, and artifacts from the mines out in the West Wallsend area. So it's quite good. They also have stuffed birds there, because if you've ever been to West Wallsend, you'll know that there's a museum hotel, and the origin of why it's called the Museum Hotel is the daughter of the publican used to collect Australian birds and stuff them. So I think there's 40 or 50 of these that now all belong to Lake Macquarie Council, and these will be rotated around. So they're very nice. That's good. They also have a virtual reality thing, so kids can go there and walk through a coal mine and even experience a cave in. So there's lots of things for everyone. The part that Lake Macquarie didn't want to take were maps. So this is a pile of maps here. There's 600 of them, and they mine maps and parish maps and things like that. That particular pile there is going to go to the Edgeworth David Museum at Abermain. So that's good. And this pile here, they don't have a home for them. And so I actually spoke to Mark Rigby, who's in the room today, and he said that the Stockton Historical Society will take ownership of those, which is good. So there's things in their parish maps of Wallenby. There's a road and railway map of Liddell, so I probably should tell Ken about that. Warkworth, Broke, Warraballong, that's probably Stanford, Merthyr. So I'm pleased that we've found a home for those things. The other 3/4 of their collection, which is things like mince grinders and irons and horseshoes and stuff like that, the museum is basically giving those back to the donors. And I'm doing a little bit of work with the committee out there, because they're in a transition. There's a trend that there's the museum society, and when the museum is no longer there, they need to transition into being an historical society. So they have asked me about how does that happen, and I said to them that what I think is best practice at the moment is to create a blog site where you can display the items that you have, like an online museum, if you like, because that one of the problems with the age groups of historical societies and museums is they can't attract young people. So I think they have to go online, and they're open to that. So that's all I want to cover there, but I'll give you 2 other quick updates. One is that next year Wallsend turns 150 years old. And that's in about April next year. So we've got about 10 months to get something happening. So I'm working with the local community to get photos, put together a book, maybe a demonstration soccer match between Wallsend and Ninmai, maybe a kayak event on Ironbark Creek. For those that don't know, Ironbark Creek used to have ferries and boats that ran from Sandgate up to Wallsend, and there was a wharf at Wallsend. So we might have a bit of a reenactment there and involve the schools. So those things are happening sort of on a volunteer basis. I'm yet to approach Newcastle City of Newcastle formally to get a park dedicated, but there's an area of wetland between Bunnings and the high school, which might make a suitable Centenary Park. And that's what I'm crossing my fingers about. And I was very pleased to talk to Councillor Adam Check, who walks her dog around that particular wet area of Wallsend. So I'm quietly hoping that that councillor and her dog might support the idea of having a park to mark the celebration. The one thing that's missing, though, which would be really good, would be an awesome bronze statue of a totem. And I'm pretty sure that the high school said to me that the local totem is an eagle. So I'm thinking, yep, maybe I should talk to Julie Squires after this about bronze.
I'm doing a steel eagle at the moment for Wanneroo as well.
Well, we want a bigger one. Okay, and then the other one is a Lambton Pool site, which Lambton Pool site in World War II had gun pits. So I put together a history. I've interviewed aged residents in their 90s. There were decoy guns in the adjacent suburbs, and I've put together a little bit of post-war stuff. So I've done this for the Veteran Affairs and Monuments people and for Fort Scratchley Historical Society. So just for the orientation, that's Lambton Park. There's the little library up that end. This is where the swimming pool is now. And I'll show you here these gun sites, which are there. So there's 4 guns there. We think they're heavy anti-aircraft guns because when they used to practice firing them, the neighboring houses used to shake and crack the plasterwork. So, so that's good. And for greater connection, this is Lambton Park. There's those 4 guns. Over in Bindera Road, there were 4 guns over here made of timber. And they were decoys in case the Japs were flying over. And in Wallara Oval, behind Lambton High School, there were also 4 gun emplacements here made out of timber. So we kind of got the pool with the real guns and 2 nearby parks with timber guns. So that's a good bit of Australian history right in Newcastle.
Robert,
That's
you know
all.
I'm going to ask, because we've already had this conversation, but did they have, I can't see evidence of it, did they have any searchlight, engine room or searchlights with them?
The one, Lambton Park, one person said that there was a searchlight, but most of the older people just said, well, you go out at night and you could see lights flashing all over Newcastle. So they didn't actually know where the lights were.
Yeah, I basically, mate, we'll get together because for my new book, as you know,
yes,
that would be really helpful. And I had something else to ask you, but I won't do it in this meeting. We'll catch up. Yeah.
Okay, and the other thing of significance, just for everyone's education, is in Lambton Park here, up here, that's the bowling green, and in World War II, the defence put a security fence all around that, including the bowling green. And the bowlers went to the Department of Defence and said, well, this is stupid. If the Japs fly over, they'll see a bowling green with no bowlers on it. So they worked with the Department of Defence, and the Lambton bowlers were given security passes to get them past the sentry to go in so that they could play bowls, so it looked like an active one. So I thought that's a nice, a quaint little bit of Lambton history. That's all.
Great, thanks, Robert. Reminds me a bit of Blazing Saddles.
Yes.
All right. Okay, well, thank you very much. Any questions? I think we're just tracking a bit tight for time, but got about 15 minutes for a discussion on Yirannali. So if there are any questions, fire away. Or statements like...
Robert?
No, I was just thinking about the eagle out at Sanctuary. You know, that's beautiful. They've got the canoes as well, you know, out here. What's they call that development? I have got photos of it, but I won't get it up now. To the Indigenous peoples, and they've got the canoes, the same type of thing.
We find the eagles very potent symbol here. We've got Tuka is based on an eagle. We've got the Yalawang Place is an eagle. Biraband, who features in this story, is eagle.
It's a beautiful sculpture too.
But there's also the sea eagle, and then there's the wedge-tailed eagle, so it depends on which eagle.
So,
Excuse me, Johnny.
sorry, yes?
Johnny, can I give a couple of dates for people's calendar, please?
You can, but we've got that for the updates after the discussion.
Right.
So if you can just hang in, 15 minutes.
You said 15 minutes.
Well, that's what I'm trying to, well, 15 minutes is not up yet. Just nothing. So I guess the question we're going to ask is what is the difficulty in getting these things? See, last month we had a presentation about First Nations people's reaction to colonial statues, colonial monuments, and there's a real, it's terrible for them because they see these, the way to understand this that brought home to me is that we can put these statues up, Cook or Macquarie or whatever, but to Indigenous peoples it's like, a Jewish person having to put up with going past the statue of Dr. Mengele or Himmler. In some cases, you're dealing with a traumatic situation that colonisation has brought. And while European people want to celebrate those sorts of stories because they see the good in it, from an Aboriginal First Nation perspective, they see a lot of pain. So this is an example of one of those sorts of things that can happen if we do it correctly.
Yeah, there's actually, sorry to interject, but there's actually in Victoria, there's a monument to someone where he's on horseback with a bag of skulls, and you can see the skulls through his bag. It's absolutely horrendous. Some of the portrayals, that's a real statue. When I was doing research with the Kurnai elders, they showed it to me, and I just couldn't believe that sort of thing was put there. So I think one of the issues is often for like Teresa and other people I've worked with, they haven't had the mechanism, and even this, I've had local artists come to me, local Aboriginal artists say, you know, tenders will come out and there might be the opportunity to acknowledge culturally, but they're used to working in something ephemeral like weaving or 2D like painting. And so translating that into that public art process where, as I said, I'm actually being engaged by Wollongong Council now to do a bronze casting of a steel sculpture made by another Aboriginal artist working together, again, because the steel is rusted out. So, you know, public art is a really specific field for non-Indigenous as well as Indigenous artists. There is so much to do with public safety, public liability. The tenders themselves are so complex. A lot of artists aren't going to look at it, let alone an Indigenous artist. So, you know, there's different things where quite often there's tenders are now coming out directed for Indigenous artists only, which is great, you know, and ways to do it. But the way I've been working is being able to translate something 2D, or like I've cast weavings into bronze and weavings into aluminium, and ways of going, okay, how can we translate, you know, your artwork into something that will fit within those parameters of longevity. As I said, Newcastle, Wollongong, highly corrosive ocean environment. Bronze is the only medium that I would suggest in that. Aluminium might be cheaper, but it's going to corrode and go powdery. You've got Corten steel, and I've used that before, but it only has a lifespan of over 25 years if it's 2 millimetres or thicker. And you can't cast it, you know, it's fabrication. So all those very practical, tangible things can be an impediment.
So bronze is the way to go.
So bronze is the way to go. And then you've got the budgets, finding budgets that allow something like that.
Julie, I'm Carol.
Yes.
I think I interviewed you a dozen times, but it's probably the first time we've actually met. I'm the chair of the city's public art reference group, and I would love to invite you in to come and address the group at some stage. All the committees, the short version is a few years ago, all of our committees were shut down, and over the last few years, we've been rebuilding them. Public Art Reference Group originally was started to, and really up until this point, has primarily been dealing with 1% developer contribution.
Yeah.
And we've had some wonderful work coming in over the last few years through that, but it's also been about rebuilding the policy, rebuilding contacts, working with Gurukai and Indigenous artists. HCC, DC have just had Jasmine Creation do that wonderful with the bridges over Cottage Creek, which is fabulous. But this is a really important piece of, I think, information gathering and rebuilding our knowledge, resources, our contacts, along with Gurukai and what we can do. What we don't have is a public art officer, but Lottie Hilda from the Central Coast.
I had a meeting with her 2 days ago.
Yeah, she's one of the members. So a couple of years ago, I said one of the things that we need on this is subject matter experts on this committee, because you don't want me going, that looks cute, let's just do that. So we've got Lottie and a few other people who now come and help guide, but it would be, I'll get in touch with you. It would be wonderful if you would come and talk to us about some of these issues, because what I'm trying to get done, even without a public art officer, is an audit, a simple audit. What have we got? You know, what do we have? How is it being cared for? I know we've got one on the foreshore that's damaged. That how do we?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do we? Who do we? You know, all of those sorts of things. But we also don't have the fund. To actually go and do it. So there's a lot. That
sort of knowledge base, you know, I'm always happy to like pass on knowledge, because this is something I'm passionate about. And it's like, you know, even approaches of when to bring the artists in, you know, not doing it like this plonk thing at the end, or this tokenistic thing of, oh, let's get some Aboriginal artists and maybe their work can be integrated into this, you know, infrastructure. It's like, that's not the way to go. You know, we want it authentic.
We're getting better outcomes now because of those things where, you know, we do have someone who can say, no, you're required to do that car park screen anyway. So if you want to make it art, that's great, but it's not part of your contribution. So I'd love that. Thank you.
That'd be great. And also that the importance of story being Indigenous led, you know, what stories, instead of being given a space and the parameters are really fixed, instead of going, what is really important, and understanding that there's not one group that there are multiple groups and multiple interests, but there are ways, even like I was saying, the Sydney project was, Cook, the hottest potato. But with that whale and the way that even within that really confined situation, 4 months, everything that could go wrong, and yet we managed to do it in a way where the end result is something that resonates with all sorts of children, grandparents, multicultural, Indigenous, non-Indigenous. When it hits the mark, it resonates, and that's when you know it works. And so something that can seem like so scary, like they've got now one of the elders from La Perouse, it's on YouTube, he's standing next to the sculptures talking about the creation stories. When I see that, I get excited because I know, yes, we've hit the mark. And so we're not being tokenistic, we are going, this is really authentic. And doing it in bronze, and some people go, well, that's not a traditional medium. And it's like, why does something have to be a traditional medium? Aboriginal people it's an ongoing connection with country. It's not historic, it's living.
Yeah.
And so these translations, like doing the Kurnai shield in steel on the highway, I had 40 members of the Kurnai community jumping up and down, watching the crane, bringing that up, because it's, signifying and acknowledging their culture. It doesn't have to be a traditional artefact approach either. So there's so many ways.
And that local connection is so critical.
It's
we know
Yeah.
that there have been mistakes made,
Yeah.
and we know even with things like dual place namings that some of those we don't think now are actually correct.
Yeah.
So there's, let alone
so
when you're
hard.
talking about art. Yeah.
Art and language.
And within our project, what we've tried to do is create a template. If you read the vision statement carefully, the template within which Aboriginal artists from different groups in our community, like white people tend to go to the Aboriginal community and think it's just one group of people. In a sense it is, but there are many different groups within the Aboriginal community in our area, and some get on very well with each other, some not so well with each other. And what our template is about is literally unity in community. What we're trying to do is give each Aboriginal artist from groups, and our process is to invite the groups to nominate their artist, but each can tell their unique story from the perspective of their group without having to compromise with other groups. And within the collective, coordinated through Julie, the plan is then we end up with amazing artistic Indigenous unity and community co-created with us white fellas as well. But we believe it's a way of getting past internal divisions and actually coming together in the spirit of unity and community without pretending that we've solved all our other problems or all our other issues. Let's just kind of create a bullshit-free zone where we all can co-create together. That's the essence. If you read the vision statement of Yirannali, the White Project, that's the essence of it, and there are several creative areas within it where the unique representation can occur. As I've said right along to different people along the way, if one Aboriginal group or artist's idea of part of the timeline of reconciliation is the portrayal of a massacre, well, so be it. That's real, that's truth-telling. If the next Aboriginal group or person's idea of a moment in the continuum of reconciliation is a meeting between people from Indigenous and non-Indigenous worlds, like the Coming Together Day, for instance, on the foreshore many years ago, that Donna Meehan and Moya Farrell wrote about in Navigastrian Tales, something like that, so be it, that's great. But what we're suggesting is that the unity in the community aspect would be all those different unique views then give us an overview of what we all might think of in white man's terms as the Aboriginal community. But I'm just very conscious that we're all different and they're all different groups.
Paul, Johnny, can I speak? It's Susan here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
The other thing I think is so interesting about the Biraban Threlkeld story is that this is a time when an Indigenous man is teaching a white man about being quiet. So he has a voice, I think, at a time when we are all about and are discussing the whole Indigenous voice to Parliament. I just think that's a really interesting coincidence of events. And I think the other interesting thing about it is it's one of the earliest documented interactions between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people where white people are the students and the Indigenous man is the teacher about this land. So that's one of the things I love about it.
I think it's very appropriate too. And Julian, I just think it's great what you've been doing. And but unfortunately I've got to go. But the thing is, the idea of having this strength of line coming right through from the land, I think is just brilliant.
Cool.
Yep. Right, keep it going.
All right, so first of all, just say thanks for your presentation, Julie. That was awesome. I think when you're considering the way you connect with the First People and tell a bit of a story around what their dreaming is, it's really great to go with that totemism and totems for individual areas. I also see with these monuments around totems being erected as an opportunity to create a classroom, an area where you can also go and be quiet and reconnect with those countries and gain knowledge from the landscape, from the whales, from the areas that you say have put together in your sculptures. The thing that really resonates with me around the diversity within the First People of this country, and I think I want to just touch on the fact that I'm not using these words like Aboriginal, like Indigenous, is the thing that we need to really start to think about, because for me, I'm a Murri and I'm a Koori. I'm not from the coastal areas. I don't know these stories, but there is also the opportunity for me to connect with the local community and find how a specific area can hold knowledge and can be shared in a number of different mediums, whether it be just me sitting there and listening to the sound of the ocean or seeing what animals are in the area. I think for me, knowledge comes in so many different forms, and this is a really great way to be able to create a classroom within the environment with homage to the first ancestral roots. When I think about myself in the structure of what the dreaming is, and it's been talked about as the dream time, creation time. These are times where things are being created, and that's not a long time ago. That's today, that's tomorrow, and that's into the future. So that concept that we are living in the dreaming right now, we have to be able to take those steps to really embody what teachings can come from an Indigenous epistemology or our epistemology. It's the first time I use the word, but yeah, just trying to take a moment to sit with different ideas and different structures that can be erected to share with everybody is a great thing to do. We don't have to be in a library to investigate.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, thank you. That was one of the themes that kept coming through for me. Even in Alice Springs, one of these pivotal moments for me when the sculptures were opened was to see an elder from one of the communities just sitting with a young boy and talking about the story through the imagery on the Coolmon. you know, and speaking in language, but just talking about it. And one of the artists I work with, whose image I actually showed, April Campbell, her first language was also Warlpiri, and we found it a little hard to communicate except through art. But at the launch of the sculptures, she just came up and she started dancing to the Coolamon with her image, which of course got me all teary. But that sort of connection, as she said, that imagery. And in Newcastle, I've had community members say to me, there's nowhere to take children to teach them about our local First Nations culture as well. Even like they're teaching it in schools, but to go on a trip and be able to sit and somewhere like on this foreshore, as you said, the space that we were hoping to have earmarked for this project is a quiet space. You walk over the hill and the wind drops and the sense of just stillness there. So to create somewhere where people can just sit and be in that place and feel, like you said, you would see whales going past there, you would see everything, and you're just like nestled in this amazing, you know, area. It's just so beautiful and needed.
Yeah, well, just to touch on that, the Pavilion Birrabarn out there at Fletcher, there is a bigger part of that story and that journey out there. It's not just that one spot. If you go on the walk around the edges of the sanctuary, you'll see that there are different parts and different parts of that story along each individual sitting area. And to go from one to the other is actually a knowledge journey you're going on yourself. I used to live out there. I take my kids around every other day and my dogs, but yeah, it was really good just to, you know, take the kids on that 3.9 kilometer walk, and they knew the story after we interpreted it to them, and they were taking their schoolmates around to different parts of the park and saying, think about this, think about this.
How cool would that be? My head is exploding now. I'm seeing representations of these dreaming stories all over the landscape of Newcastle and Lake Macquarie, because those stories are there. I mean, just this morning, you know, one of the mothers was commenting on the children talking about the moon crying into the Belmont Lagoon. You know, these are stories that are very evocative.
Yeah.
Anyone have any?
Look, I go back to the original though, the Circus of Stones, remember?
Yeah.
Drellkill on the high.
But taking kids to them and saying these are the sort of representations of these things, that's a fantastic sort of idea. Look, for the sake of time, I want to keep going, but I can't because I'm not eternal, unfortunately. But thanks, Carol, for the idea to get Julie into council and see whether we can get these things going, because I've had all sorts of crazy ideas. That Destiny statue is too small from a Titanic perspective. You know, I see the shoulders of an Aboriginal man just creeping out of the harbour and blocking shipping. You know, that'd be it.
I told Floyd Green the other night that I want public access to Destiny.
Well, I'd like it to be relit for her 25th anniversary, because I was never happy with the lighting originally, because it makes it look like she's put on a few extra kilos from the front. But
if anyone
she is my
has
favourite
something
thing,
burning to say, I'm happy to go over time. We'll go on to now the, thank you very much. I hope we've covered some things. If not, just keep yelling at me and we'll keep going. But now for the recent news and updates. So firstly, just before we go to Leslie, we're over to Isabel, who mentioned about the exhibition downstairs. For those of you who are here, the beautiful Glamour on Glass. Isabel, do you just want to let them know that it's now up?
So should I just talk briefly about the exhibition and what it's about?
Yeah.
Cool. So for those who don't know me, I'm Isabel Whittle. I'm the 2023 Vera Deakin intern with the Special Collections in the Library. Last week on Wednesday, we launched the Glamour on Glass exhibition, which I actually curated. I'm very proud. It's held in level 2 of the library just outside of the Special Collections. The exhibition itself involved photographs that were developed from glass plate negatives, and they were featured in the Newcastle Sun newspaper. These particular photographs are from the 1930s. Glass plate negatives were an incredibly innovative piece of technology that were ahead of their time. They're actually so incredible. They went out of fashion due to the fact that they were very, very heavy and fragile, prone to breakage, but they were able to capture such detail that you'll see, if you see the exhibition, how like they're blown up so much bigger than they would have been in the newspaper, but you can still see every little detail. They were so incredible. The actual exhibition focuses on women's fashion during the 1930s in the context of the Great Depression in Australia, particularly the way which women expressed themselves through fashion while dealing with the economic hardships of the time, along with focusing on the resourcefulness that women displayed in relation to women's work, domestic labour and dressmaking. The photographs that I chose highlighted the fashion trends of the 1930s and how these reflected the social and political climates of the time period. 1930s fashion trends were reflective of the more serious and grown-up nature of the decade in comparison to the playful trends of the 1930s. There was actually a quote that I read during my research that said something to the effect of the 1930s having no time for the boyish nature of the 1920s flapper, highlighting how women's newfound place in the workforce, along with the economic hardships of the time, influenced the structured and tailored elements of 1930s day wear, along with the glamorous and feminine elements of 1930s evening wear. The photographs told a story by themselves, but we ended up being able to source some loaned items from the Australian Museum of Clothing and Textiles in Maitland, such as 1930s hats, jewellery, shoes, and even a wedding dress. It launched on Wednesday last week and it had an excellent turnout. Nancy Cushing, a professor here at the university, did a speech, as well as Sandy, who's the president of the Australian Museum of Clothing and Textiles, and me. It was great to see so many people at the launch, and we had some great feedback during the night, but if anyone's interested in checking it out, it closes on the 29th of September, so there's a good amount of time to check it out if you would like.
Thank you very much. Good stuff. All right.
Here we go.
Over to over to Leslie. Sorry, Leslie.
I want to thank Isabel first. It's a great exhibition. Congratulations, Isabel. I'm very, very impressed. I think you have a great future.
Thank you.
You did a wonderful job. Just a couple of updates, dates for the diary. I'm speaking on behalf of the local Historical Society. Patterson is launching Wayne Packfield's latest book on Morpeth steamships, 1831 to 46. It follows on his other two books to do with sailing vessels on the Patterson, 1804 to 1912, and the steamships. It's the same format and very easy to read and masses of photographs. Also, Raymond Terrace Historical Society is working on publication. Should interest a lot of people as James King's pottery works at Yirannali, but they're still working on that. And I've got a big date for you to write in your diary. We have our book fair back. So it's opening on the 9th of September. It sounds like a long way away, but those who know what's been going on at the university know we have been moved twice since the last book fair. And so we're having a bit of trouble getting organised. But now we're at the 9th of September. We will be looking for volunteers to come in and help shuffle books around and that sort of thing. So if you can get in touch with me in August for volunteering, but that is we support 10 scholarships here at the university. So it's not a bad effort from what's ended up with now. We only have 28 volunteers. So just what we were saying before, they're all getting too old. The same with the local history societies. Everyone is getting too, they're not getting too old. They're willing.
It's in Newcastle somewhere, I heard. The font of eternal youth.
But we just can't, you don't just, the people like Patterson and Raymond Terrace are struggling to get people to do the work in their museums. It's a shame, but because just like Robert was saying, it could close down.
Excuse me, where is the uni book fair?
Where do you think?
Where? Is it the Great Hall as before? Oh, well done.
We've got the Great Hall again, which is true. Okay, that's
Well, thank you very much,
That's
Leslie.
the 3 dates.
Great. All right, Ron, do you have an update for the board?
Oh,
Yep, now I'm unmuted. Yeah, nothing particular. We had a very successful day in for the King's birthday, and we finally have our new database up and running and catching up on about 18 months of cataloguing. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Donnelly from the Newcastle Industrial Heritage Association at Del Pratt's Cottage. Are you there? He's going to be so angry with me. It's all your fault.
He was there earlier.
Yeah, I know he was.
Yeah, now he's
Anyway, it doesn't matter. Mark Matrigas, Chair of the Hunter Regional Committee of the National Trust. There you go.
Yeah, hi all. Last month I spoke about, made a quick summary about Iris Capital's East End Stage 3 or 4 project. Just to recap, it's a $156 million project which involves the demolition of 10 properties in the East End. We're building up to 5 new buildings. 3 of the 10 buildings will be reduced to just facades, and some of the five new buildings will be up to 11 stories in height. You can see from the first slide here, this photo is from 1862. It hangs on the wall of the Newcastle Club. And Joni, I found out, by the way, it's actually dating from 1863. You can see the Wesleyan Chapel in the enlarged photo. The house in question is the house on the right, which says note break front. Next slide, please. Joni, you might have missed one. Can you go back? Is there 74, the very first slide? No, it's gone. Okay. This slide here is taken from the Illustrated Sydney News, 1867. Number 2 there is 74 King Street. Next slide, please. Here's some detail from those 7 brilliant slides held by the State Library of New South Wales. The house in question is number 2. Look very closely at the number 2 on the left there. You can see 3 Gothic gables at the top, Gothic attics, and 2 very tall chimneys. Next slide, please. Let's get a bit more detail here. It's a house in the centre there, occupied by Mortimer Lewis Jr., or probably owned by Mortimer Lewis Jr. You can see here the pointed arches, the pointed window headers and the roof gables. Next slide, please. In 1875, we can see there in the centre, lot 97, 74 King Street, and down below in a panoramic view from 1889, we can clearly see number 74 King Street. Next slide, please. Great view from Greg Ray's Newcastle's slideshow, about 1960, 1959, down the right with a red roof at 74 King Street. Note it has 2 chimneys which are later consolidated into 1 chimney, and you can just make out the gabled Gothic attic in the centre. Next slide, please. Here's the adjoining building called Edgecombe in 1971. Mortimer Lewis Jr., the architect, the government architect and clerk of works for Newcastle, actually lived in that building with his family, and he owned and developed the property next door, 74 King Street. Next slide, please. Here we see on the top the Morsted Gee fire insurance plan from 1886. In the centre there, you can see the words Lewis, and on the left there, the 2-storey timber building. Yellow indicates timber. On the right is the Hunter Waterboard plan from 1895, and you can see similarities from today with the overhead view, the arch bay window in the centre, and the small portico on the left. Next slide, please. Here's the view from the inside. This has been mapped by City Plan. You can see below that they rate this City Plan. The City Plan rates this residence of being typical and of no particular significance. On the inside here, you can see the ecclesiastical Gothic windows on the left-hand side, and the interior of the lounge room on the right-hand side. In the last 2 weeks, those windows have been knocked out by vandals. Next slide, please. In conclusion, that building is 160 years old. It's the oldest timber building in Newcastle. It's the oldest two-storey building in Newcastle. That is the City Centre Heritage Conservation Area. It is equally as old as the 1861 police station, which was built and supervised by Mortimer Lewis Jr. as a single-storey building. Next door to that is the Telegraph Office at the corner of Watt Street and Hunter Street, also built in 1861 as a single-storey building. Watt Street, two-storey building, made of timber, Gothic design, mimics the style of his father, the more famous Mortimer Lewis Sr., who built Richmond Villa in Sydney, which is on the State Heritage Register. So it's a pity we can't find the first image, but it's a little green building there. Next time you go up King Street, have a look on the left. It's opposite the Newcastle Club. It's Newcastle's oldest building by far, 160 years old today, this year, rather. That's it. Any questions?
Any questions? Thank you, Mark. Anyway, let us know what we need to do.
Sure.
Is that under threat, that building?
It's being demolished.
Oh.
It's being demolished. It's been rated. It's rated by councils contributory to the heritage conservation area. It's rated by the Heritage Consultants Direct Capital as of no value. I've notified the Heritage Office. I think it's at least a local listing and possibly state heritage.
Mark, you have two councillors in the room.
Yep. Yeah, I get that.
Well, it's the first time hearing of it.
That this is our oldest building and oldest two-storey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
older than Rose Cottage and Tollhouse.
We're here to help if we can, but for both Councillor Adamczyk and I, this is the first where I used to be a GP in there about 30 years ago.
I mean, we've got that photographic chain of evidence now, and we also had, it's interesting, it has flush timber, which is probably milled on site. It's quite ancient. It has shingles on it. It has the bay roofs. It has all those little Victorian rustic Gothic attributes, which are quite rare. And when we talk about heritage conservation, that excludes Claremont House and Toll Cottage. They're actually in the Hill Conservation Area. So certainly this is either the oldest building or the second oldest building.
Okay, Mark, I would highly recommend that somebody get in touch with us ASAP for us to have even the slightest chance of anything.
Absolutely. Keep your eyes out for the newspaper this week.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, councillors, for helping. All right, I'm 4 minutes over. I'm sorry, everyone.
Oh, well done.
Because in our lives, I know our life is precious, and I'm so happy that you spent the last hour and a half with us of your precious lives.
Oh, my pleasure.
So thank you very much. Next month's Hunter Living Histories is dedicated to the Hannon Archive. So we're going to have a number of presentations on the conservation, the volunteer effort that's going into that, because it's the equivalent of our photographic pyramid. All right, so if Newcastle was going to build a pyramid out of negatives, it would be the Hannon Archive. It's massive. There's 1 million images. It's beyond the scope of the university. This has to be an immortal thing, which means we need teams of people working on this. But anyway, we'll have all the surviving Hannon photographers and founders in the room with us. So we'll have the presentations from the various students, community and conservator Amir, who's working on them, and then we'll have a bit of a show and tell with the people that actually created this thing across the last 60 years. So when we talk about issues with natural disasters like places like Lismore, this is the sort of memory backup that Newcastle and the region needs, so that if disasters do befell us, we've got a backup for people's family photos and things like that that are cherished. That's their family connections.
1955 Maitland flood.
Yeah, that's right. And I think Jude Conway said that one of the firms actually photographed her wedding, and there was another one that chimed in too, so everyone's got a bit to play in this. But they took pictures of every activity. Every ship that came off the Carrington slipways was photographed, industrial, mining, you name it, events. So anyway, not to be missed. See you next month, and thank you very much for being part of the gathering this afternoon. Thank you. Thank you.